You know the story, how they were delivered from the Egyptians. God called them out to be a peculiar people. Deuteronomy chapter 7 verses 6 and 8 reads, speaking to Israel, "For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his own possession out of all peoples who are on the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love on you, not to choose you, because you were more in number than any of the peoples. For you were the" what? "Fewest. You were the least of all peoples. Because the Lord loved you and kept the oath which he swore to your forefathers." Who's he talking to there? Abraham, Isaac, and who? Jacob. "The Lord brought you out by a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt." Can you say amen? Notice, the Lord guided them out and took them to the promised land with a little 40-year hiatus in the wilderness because of their lack of faith and stubbornness. Only Joshua and Caleb made it through the wilderness from the original exiteers of Egypt. God told Israel he would be their king, he would be their God, and they would be his people. Notice in Deuteronomy 14:2, "For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. And the Lord has chosen you to be a people for his own possession out of all peoples who are on the face of the earth." But that wasn't good enough for them. And in the Lord's wisdom, he also foresaw that Israel would desire a king. Deuteronomy 17:14. We're setting the plate. We're setting the plate. "When you come to the land which the Lord your God is giving you," Deuteronomy 17:14, "and possess it and dwell in it, and say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me." Now we'll go into our text. 1 Samuel 8, 1 through 5. "Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel." Sometimes parents can desire something from their children, and it's the wrong thing. Sometimes we can be deep in the forest and we can't see what's really there, and we have desires, and we put our children in situations of failure because we are blind. Notice verse 2. "The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they were judges in Beersheba." Verse 3. "But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice." Samuel should have been a little bit wiser. Samuel should have taken the lessons that he learned from Eli. If most of you who know the story, Eli was the high priest at the time where his mom Hannah took Samuel to the temple and gave Samuel over. Hannah could not have children, and she made a pledge to God, and she said, "If you give me a child, I will dedicate him and give him to the temple." She kept her promise. Samuel was raised in the house of God. Samuel saw how Eli's sons were corrupt. And let me also make a point at this. There are many times that many of us, and let me speak to the context, there are many pastors and ministry people that sometimes we get so much involved with ministry that we do not even teach our children. Sometimes people wonder, have you ever seen, sometimes people wonder and they say, man, sometimes the worst kids out there are the pastor's kids. That's true, that's been said. I can tell you, I praise God that no one can say that of my family. I'm going to tell you why. If I went in the direction that I was going to before I went to seminary, that would have been a true statement. You see, when I first became a pastor and I was pastoring Rancho Cordova Shingle Springs Church District, I was so busy trying to hasten the coming of the Lord and do my part so I could be reunited with my daughter again. I was doing it at the cost of my family. One day we were sitting there at dinner and a member of the Shingle Springs Church called and they needed me, and so I said, guys, I'll be back. And Luke, our oldest son, looked at me, and I remember Luke just went through the passing of his sister, and now he has a new brother. And I remember Luke looked over at me and he said, I've shared this with you guys before. Luke looked over and said, Dad, I wish you would treat us as you treat the church members. I'm going to translate to you what he was saying. He looked at me and said, why is it that anyone can call up on a split second and you're out the doors to go help them, but you're not here for us? I was kind of shocked, blown away. Came back that night, Reagan and I had a conversation. And I am thankful that I am married to my best friend, and she takes her job serious as God has placed her in my life. And she said that, you know what? You are putting in way too many hours at both of your churches. You're hardly here. And I said, you're crazy. I go, that's not taking place. So, being the person that she is and was, she started documenting everything I was doing. Dates, times, all of it. She waited 3 months. We sat down again, and I saw the piece of paper that she brought to my attention. And who do you think was right? Reagan or yours truly? Yeah, exactly. Reagan. I was very agitated. And I'm going to share with you what was taking place. In my brokenness of missing my daughter, I wanted to do everything within my power to try to hasten the coming of Jesus so I could be with her, even not knowingly, at the cost of not being there for my family. There are many ministers who are doing this same thing. And let me be so bold enough to be able to say, not just ministers and pastors in the local churches, there are people even as administrators in our church, whether at the General Conference, the North American Division, or the new building at Douglas Boulevard. They're doing the same thing. We think that we're doing the right thing, but we see it only from our angle, that we can't sit down and have like an overview of the whole forest. We only see a part of it, and we only see it through our eyes. Good things can be bad for us. Good things can be bad for us if we take it to the extreme. Samuel should have known better than to place his sons. And let me also add here, I have never ever told my children, I've never promoted my children for ministry. Ever. It's too hard. Sometimes it's too hard because the church can be hard. Other times it can be hard because the administrators above make it hard. Sometimes it's hard also because, you know what? Ministry is just hard. It really is. And I've never wanted my children to be involved in ministry unless the Lord called them, because I know if the Lord calls them, they will make it through. They'll make it through. They'll make it through. I've never promoted my children to do that because I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly in ministry. And as I've seen the good, bad, and the ugly of ministry, as a parent, I want to protect my children. Who doesn't want to protect their children? Now, you know what? Of course, it'd be nice because most of the time people think, I want my son to, or I want my children, I want my child to be a minister. And they just think about ministry as what I'm doing to you here and now. I'm going to tell you, this part of my job is about this much. And it's the easiest. It's when I'm dealing with families that are broken. Families that Satan has got in the midst of and is destroying a husband and wife, or the children, or there's an ex involved, or an employer pressing things down upon you, and families are being torn at the seams, which that part of the job, and I can share it with you, I love the most. It's the hardest, but I love the most. The politics side of pastoring, you could have it. I can't stand it. I think most of you that know me know that. I know others do a better job of me diplomatically and at times even politically. But I'm not a politician. If I was to be a politician, I never would have chose to go in pastoring. Samuel knew better, but he placed his children in a place. And notice what took place. They took bribes and they perverted justice and they were dishonest. There should never be, follow me, allow me to be bold on that, friends. There should not be ministers if they're going to be dishonest. Straight up. I don't care at any level. Local church level, local conference level, North American Division, General Conference. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has been called by God to do a special purpose in this earth, to be peculiar. And if we cannot be honest as ministers, how in the world can we expect the local church and its members to be honest? Must start from the top. Must start from the top. Notice what took place. They came and they said, look, you are old. Can you imagine? How would you like that? That would have to be hard. You're a pastor. You're 65, 70 years old, right towards at the end of your pastorate. And people come to you and go, hey, man, you're old. We see you're getting ready to set in the sun. The sunset oaks right over the tree, and we see yourself getting ready to go into your golden years. And you know what? Your sons are corrupt. And instead of saying, what are we going to do? What do we need to do? They say, set a king over us. Can you imagine hearing that? Samuel was broken. But notice, point number one I'd like to bring out. Because they asked for a king. Notice what they said here in the end of verse 5 there in Samuel. Now make us a king to judge us like all the what? Nations. Point number one. Israel wanted to be like everyone around them. Israel wanted to be like all the other nations. And I want to share something with you. Don't ever be like anyone around you. Ever. Be thankful who you are in God. Can you imagine if everyone, let's have some fun. Can you imagine if everyone around was all just like Pastor Mike? There'd be a lot of truthfulness going around. A lot of straightforwardness going around. But then you know what? Where people's strengths are, there's also their what? Weaknesses. Yeah, because your strength is also your weakness. I am very transparent and very true. In fact, so much so at times that sometimes I just don't know when to keep quiet. That's the bad side. That's the bad side. They wanted to be so don't be, I remember I went back to PUC as a 30-year-old to get my degree because I knew God was calling me in ministry. I had left UPS. I went into a preaching class. The majority of everyone in the preaching class, they're all between 18 and 21. And I remember that, I'm in the preaching class and everyone has different styles and everyone presents it differently. And I remember after I preached, I saw some of my colleagues, they were really blessed by it. And I could tell the teacher of my preaching class did not like my style one bit. Met with him as he met with all of the students, and he was going to grade me. He was going to grade me on what happened, and this is what he told to me. I will not give the name. This is what he said. He goes, Mike, why can't you preach like Mark Finley, who sits there with his hands crossed and is very quiet and is subdued? The Lord loves you. Give your heart to him. And when he said that to me, I looked over at my teacher. I said, because I'm not Mark Finley. I realized then and there that, you know what? Each person likes a certain delivery and a certain message. I got that right away. And I looked that there's going to be some people who will not like Mike's animated ways. But there'll also be a group of people who will. God never meant me to be Mark Finley. I couldn't be Mark Finley if my life depended on it. But Mark Finley could also not be Mike Kontes. Fight your battles in your shoes, in how God made you. Don't desire to be like everyone around you. When the Israelites first settled into Canaan, they acknowledged the principles of God's theocracy, and the nation prospered there under Joshua. As they increased in their population and they began to have interactions with other nations, this brought a change. This brought a change. They wanted to conform to the nations around them. The people adopted many customs of their heathen neighbors and, in fact, sacrificed their peculiarity of holy character. God called them to be distinct, and now they wanted to have a king. Notice in verse 6, it goes on. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are now doing also to you. Now therefore heed their voice. However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them their behavior, the behavior of the king who will rule over them. Point number 2. In that passage, look what happened. In that passage, it says that Samuel, when he was talking to God, it said this thing displeased him. But notice what it says. It said Samuel didn't go to Instagram, didn't go to Facebook, didn't pick up his cell phone and call his bestie and tell him how Samuel was hurt that the people wanted a king. He didn't do that. It says there what he did. It said he went to God in prayer. Point number 2, when you are discouraged, when you are being stepped on, when you feel disappointed, when you feel something unjust, unfair, and unright is taking place in your life, the first thing you and I need to do is go to the Lord. Go to God. We go to God first and we put up our prayer and we say, Lord, I do not know what's going on here. I'm struggling to embrace what's taking place, but I know that, you know what? You say all things work together for good, even though now I see no good. I see no good. I don't know how anything good is going to come out of this, but what I do know is because you are good, somehow you're going to weave this in, even though I can't see it through my human, sinful eyesight. I know that you will peel my eyes back to be able to see in your due time. Help me not to be drowned through this disappointment and discouragement. That's the first thing. And you know what? If we went first to God, we'd save ourselves headaches from other things. So let me give you an example. We have a situation take place in our home and we're really discouraged. We're really hurt. Something has happened. And next thing you know, instead of going to God, we go to our spouse. We go to our spouse and we say, can you believe it? And we start venting. We start doing all this. And guess who's sitting right over there? The kids. The kids are over there. And we begin to start saying these things. And you know what we're teaching our kids? Is that guess what? When this happens, guess what you need to do? What mom and dad just did. That's why we're told that, you know what, when situations like that happen, you keep your peace, you look at your spouse and you say, hey, later on tonight, we need to talk about something. And then kids go to sleep, and then you can share your disappointment on what took place. But we are so overwhelmed sometimes through our own emotions that what we do is, listen closely, friends, because we cannot control ourselves and our emotions, we vomit our feelings out everywhere. In 1999, several months after Ari had passed, I think I've shared this story with you. I was at the Safeway store. The clerk was there. It might have been only like 4 weeks at this story. And I'm sitting there, and the clerk had not seen us for a while, and the clerk said, hey, how are you doing? I go, fine, how are you? Good, we were talking. And the next thing you know, the clerk's like, hey, how are your children doing? I'm thinking, oh, man. I'm thinking, yeah, I go, they're doing good. And in my mind, they were doing good. Luke's doing okay. Ariana's resting in the grave. Kids are good. I thought it would end there. And then I remember she took the next step, and she goes, how is that beautiful daughter of yours doing? With those beautiful blue eyes. And I remember when she said that, inside of me, I was like, well, Mike, you guys know me. I'm truthful. She asked it, and if she asked it, guess what you got to do? You got to tell her. I think there probably could have been a little better way to do it, now I look back. I remember I just looked straight at her, and I was just like, yeah, she's doing okay. She passed away 3 weeks ago. And the clerk didn't know what to say. Clerk was dumbfounded. Sometimes, listen how I'm going to say this, friends. The truth never changes. But there are plenty of times in the Bible that we're told that Jesus didn't share the truth at times because people couldn't handle the truth. We have to know how to do that. But when you're emotionally broken, things happen. Reagan and I grieved through this differently. Reagan went to Compassionate Friends. How many have ever heard of Compassionate Friends? Compassionate Friends is a group now, I think they've been around maybe about 25 years would be my guess, maybe a little bit longer. They are a group that with people who have lost children, and you go together and you sit down in a group setting and you talk. And I remember Reagan was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go to this group. Do you want to go to this group? And I'm like, and I was very insensitive. I was like, no, I don't want to go to this group. And she's like, well, this group, people have lost kids. I'm like, why would I want to go tell anyone of what I'm struggling with? And Reagan's like, because they understand. And I said, because they understand. What ended up happening was when Reagan would have friends come to her and try to console her, our friends would end up crying and be broken. And what would Reagan end up doing? Consoling them. And she's like, our friends come in. No one ministers to me. I need to be able to go and be able to share on my heart. And I'm like, okay. And the reason why is because Reagan grieved that way. You know how I would grieve? I'd go places and people would ask how things are going, and guess what Pastor Mike would say? Remember one morning I was hurting, I was filled with pain, walked into a gym, and someone said they were sitting there, they knew my situation, and you know what? People just sometimes don't know what they're saying. How many of you believe that? How many of you believe sometimes people speak, but they really don't know what they're saying? The person looked at me and they said, Mike, how are you doing? And I remember when they said that, I was like, inside of me it was a bad. How many of you ever had a bad morning and you were looking for a reason to vent? I mean, all we got to do is drive on Highway 80 and you figure that out, right, in the mornings? You know, listen, because someone pulls a gun at you and waves at you on Highway 80, they're really not doing it because you cut them off. They're doing it because they have so many problems in other areas of their life that you're just a cherry on top, that they want to make sure that they squish it. Mike, how are you doing? And when she said that inside of me, I was like, her name was Linda. I'll always remember that. I was like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to unload on Linda today. And I said, do you really want to know? I gave her a chance. Gave her a chance. Do you really want to know? How are you going to answer that? You're stuck now, right? She asked the question. I asked, do you really want to know? If you don't want to know, you're going to look insensitive. And now, because that question was asked, you don't know what's coming around the corner. I began to pour my heart out. Life is, boom, and I started going down all this list. And every time I was sharing with her what was going on, her eyes were getting, she started off like this. Hey, Mike, how are you doing? Do you really want to know? Yeah. And I started talking, and she went like this. And you know what? I walked away. And when I talk to people about my problems, you know, how many of you are talkers that if you talk it, even to the dog, you talk your problems to the dog, you walk away, you feel good afterwards? How many of you are talkers? Come on now. Be honest. Yeah, we're talkers. You go up to your dog and you tell him, you know, Butch, life sucks. And you're like, oh, I feel so good. And you walk away. And you feel all good, and you're like all happy. And there's others who can't just talk to anyone. They need to talk to someone who understands and feels their pain. And that's how it was with Reagan and I, the way we grieve. People grieve differently. Notice, go to God. Don't go to Facebook. Don't go to Instagram. Don't go cast out your displeasure to everyone. Here's a quote on this about disappointment and being broken and so on. He does not always bring us to pleasant places.